You've been talking, explaining, trying to fix something that was never yours to fix. And the more you speak, the less he listens. The more you give, the less he values it. Let me tell you something that might hit hard, but it's the truth. Your silence carries more power than all your words combined. See, when you stop texting, stop chasing, stop explaining, something shifts. His comfort gets disturbed. His ego gets questioned. His mind starts racing because now, for the first time, he feels your absence instead of just hearing your presence. And that's when reality kicks in. That's when he starts to wonder, to think, to realize. But here's the real twist. It's not just about what he will do when you go silent. It's about what you finally start doing for yourself when you do. Silence creates realization. Let me tell you something most people learn the hard way. Constant presence kills curiosity. When you're always there, always available, always replying in seconds, always picking up the phone, always explaining how you feel, you remove the space a man needs to actually process your value. You think talking more will make him understand you better, but what it really does is make your presence predictable. And anything predictable becomes easy to overlook. See, realization doesn't come from noise. It comes from absence. It comes from the moment something familiar is no longer there. That's when the mind starts asking questions. That's when he notices the silence in his phone, the lack of your name popping up, the absence of your energy. And suddenly something that felt ordinary starts to feel important because now he has something to compare. What it felt like when you were there versus what it feels like now that you're not. And that contrast, that's where realization is born. When you go silent, you interrupt his routine. You disrupt the pattern he got comfortable with. You take away the easy access he had to you. And now, without your constant presence filling the gaps, he has to sit with his own thoughts. He has to replay conversations. He has to remember how you showed up, how you cared, how you gave. And for the first time, he's not just hearing you, he's actually thinking about you. Silence forces him into a space where he can no longer take you for granted because there's nothing there to take. And that's powerful because people don't realize the value of something when it's constantly available. They realize it when it's missing. When you stop calling, he starts checking his phone. When you stop texting, he starts wondering why. When you stop showing up, he starts noticing the emptiness. And in that emptiness, clarity begins to form. He starts connecting dots he ignored before. He starts recognizing effort he overlooked. He starts feeling the weight of your absence in ways your words could never make him feel. And here's the truth. You don't have to say a single thing for this to happen. You don't have to argue, convince, or explain. Your silence does all the talking. It speaks in a language that hits deeper than words because it's felt, not just heard. And when something is felt, it leaves a stronger impression. So instead of exhausting yourself trying to make him understand your worth, you step back. You pull your energy away. You give him the one thing he didn't even realize he needed space to realize. And in that space, he either wakes up to your value or he reveals that he never truly saw it to begin with. Either way, the silence gives you clarity too. Men respect what they have to figure out. Let me break something down in a way that's real and raw. People, especially men, don't place the highest value on what's handed to them, fully explained, fully available, and fully understood without any effort. That's not how respect is built. Respect grows in the process of discovery, in the effort it takes to understand something, in the mental investment required to figure it out. When everything is laid out, when every emotion is explained, when every move is predictable, there is no challenge. And without challenge, there is no engagement. You may think that being open, constantly communicating, and clarifying every detail will make things smoother. But what it often does is remove the very element that creates depth, mystery. When there's nothing left to figure out, there is nothing left to pursue. And when there is nothing to pursue, attention begins to fade. That's why silence can be so powerful, because it introduces a question mark where there used to be certainty. It creates a gap in understanding, and that gap demands attention. When you stop over-explaining yourself, when you stop answering every unasked question, when you stop filling every silence with words, you shift the dynamic. Now he has to lean in. Now he has to think. Now he has to wonder what you're feeling, what you're doing, what changed. And in that wondering, he becomes mentally invested because the human mind does not like unfinished stories. It will keep going back, replaying moments, searching for clues, trying to connect dots. And the more he thinks, the more he engages, and the more he engages, the more value he begins to assign. Effort creates attachment. That's the part most people overlook. When someone has to put in mental and emotional effort to understand you, they unconsciously start to care more because they've invested something of themselves in the process. But when you give everything away too easily, when you remove the need for effort, you also remove the opportunity for that investment to grow. Silence restores that balance. It makes your presence something that has to be earned, understood, and explored, not something that is always available on demand. And that doesn't mean playing games or being manipulative. It means having enough self-respect to not overextend yourself just to be understood. It means allowing space for someone to meet you halfway instead of you doing all the work. Because if you are always the one explaining, always the one clarifying, always the one making it easy, then you are also the one carrying the weight of the connection. And that imbalance slowly erodes respect. But when you step back, when you allow some things to remain unsaid, when you let him come to his own conclusions, you create a different kind of dynamic where he has to participate, where he has to think, where he has to engage on a deeper level. And that's where respect begins to take root, because now he's not just receiving you, he's trying to understand you. And what a person works to understand, they rarely take for granted because they know it required effort to get there. Your absence reveals your value. There's a truth people don't like to admit until life forces them to face it. Familiarity can make something priceless feel ordinary. When you're constantly present, constantly giving, constantly showing up with your time, your energy, your care, it becomes part of the background of someone's life. Not because it lacks value, but because it's always there. And when something is always there, the human mind stops measuring its worth. It stops noticing the details, the effort, the consistency. It starts assuming it will always be available. That's where absence changes everything. The moment you step back, the moment your presence is no longer guaranteed, the mind wakes up. It starts scanning for what's missing. It starts comparing what is now to what used to be. And in that comparison, value becomes clear. Because value is often invisible in consistency, but undeniable in absence. When you're no longer texting first, no longer checking in, no longer offering that steady support, the silence creates a space that can't be ignored. That space becomes a mirror. It reflects everything you used to bring into his life, the attentions, the understanding, the emotional safety, the effort. And now, without those things, he feels the difference. Not because you explained it, not because you argued your worth, but because he's experiencing the lack of it in real time. That experience hits deeper than any conversation ever could. Words can be dismissed, debated, or ignored, but absence cannot be argued with. It is felt in the quiet moments, in the routines that no longer feel the same, in the small gaps that slowly turn into something noticeable. He may not have acknowledged your consistency before, but now he notices its absence in everything. The good morning messages that don't come, the check-ins that used to feel normal, the way you paid attention to details he didn't even realize mattered. All of it becomes clear when it's no longer there, and suddenly what was once taken for granted starts to feel significant. But here's the key, your absence has to be real, not performative. It's not about pretending to disappear while secretly waiting for a reaction. It's about genuinely pulling your energy back, redirecting your focus, and no longer pouring into a space that doesn't reciprocate. Because when your absence is real, the shift is real. He doesn't just see a change, he feels it. And that feeling creates awareness. It forces him to recognize the role you played in his life and the impact you had. And in that recognition, your value becomes undeniable. But there's another side to this truth that matters just as much. Your absence doesn't just reveal your value to him, it reveals his value to you. Because how he responds to your absence tells you everything you need to know. If he reaches out, if he notices, if he makes an effort to understand and reconnect, then he's showing you that your presence mattered. But if he remains comfortable, if he doesn't acknowledge the shift, if your absence doesn't move him at all, then that's clarity too. It means the value you brought was never fully recognized or appreciated. And that realization, as painful as it may be, is also freeing because it shows you where not to invest your energy. So when you step back, you're not just creating space for him to see your worth. You're also creating space for yourself to see the truth. And the truth, no matter how it shows up, is always more valuable than false comfort. Silent shifts, the power in any connection is rarely about who cares more. It's about who controls their energy, their reactions, and their presence. Most people think power comes from saying the right things, proving a point, or winning an argument. But real power is much quieter than that. It shows up in restraint, in self-control, in the ability to not react immediately when emotions are high. When you are constantly responding, constantly explaining, constantly trying to fix or maintain the connection, you are giving away that power piece by piece. Not because you are weak, but because you are operating from a place of urgency. And urgency often signals that you are more invested in being understood than in being respected. When you shift into silence, everything changes. You remove that urgency. You stop chasing the conversation. And instead, you allow space for the other person to step forward. That shift alone changes the entire dynamic. Because now, instead of you trying to hold everything together, he has to decide if he is willing to meet you in that space. Silence interrupts the pattern he has grown comfortable with. If he's used to you always reaching out, always smoothing things over, always being the emotional anchor, your silence creates a disruption. And disruption forces awareness. He begins to notice that something is different, that the usual flow is gone, that the control he unconsciously had over your availability is no longer there. And when that control disappears, the balance of power starts to even out. You are no longer reacting to his actions. You are observing them. You are no longer trying to manage his perception. You are allowing him to reveal it. That is a position of strength. Because the person who can step back and watch without immediately responding holds a different kind of authority in the situation. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, but it is undeniable. Silence also removes emotional leverage. When you react quickly, when you show every feeling in real time, you give the other person a clear map of how to influence you. They know what triggers a response, what gets your attention, what pulls you back in. But when you become less reactive, when you allow moments to pass without immediate engagement, that map becomes unclear. Now he has to question what affects you, what matters to you, what will get a response from you. And in that uncertainty, your value increases because you are no longer easily predictable. This is not about playing games or withholding communication as a tactic. It is about reclaiming your emotional independence. It is about recognizing that you do not have to respond to everything, that you do not have to explain yourself at every moment, that you do not have to prove your worth through constant availability. When you embrace that mindset, your silence becomes intentional, not reactive. It becomes a reflection of your standards, not your frustration. And that distinction is important because people respond differently to someone who is silent out of strength versus someone who is silent out of hurt. One commands respect, the other invites confusion. When your silence comes from a place of self-assurance, it sends a clear message without a single word being spoken. It says that you value your time, your energy, and your peace enough to not give them away freely. It shows that you are not dependent on constant interaction to feel secure. And that level of self-possession naturally shifts the dynamic, because now the connection is no longer being driven by your effort alone. It becomes a space where the other person has to step up or step away, and either outcome brings clarity. Silent builds faith and respect. Let me tell you something that most people avoid facing because it's uncomfortable. The way you communicate with others often reflects the way you value yourself. Every time you over-explain your feelings to someone who isn't listening, every time you chase clarity from someone who thrives in confusion, every time you keep giving attention to someone who barely reciprocates, you're not just trying to fix the connection, you're slowly negotiating your own worth. And self-respect cannot survive constant negotiation. It requires boundaries, and sometimes the strongest boundary you can set is silence. Not silence driven by anger, not silence used as punishment, but silence rooted in awareness. Awareness that you don't need to convince anyone to see your value. Awareness that the right person won't require endless explanations to understand your intentions. Awareness that your energy is too valuable to be poured into a space where it is not acknowledged. When you choose silence in those moments where you would normally overextend yourself, you are making a powerful internal shift. You are choosing yourself over the need for validation. You are choosing dignity over temporary attention, and that choice, repeated over time, rebuilds something many people lose in unhealthy dynamics: self-respect. Because self-respect is not just about how you feel about yourself in private, it's about how you allow others to treat you in reality. It's about the standards you uphold even when emotions are involved. And emotions can make you do things that logic would never approve of. They can make you reach out when you should step back, speak when you should stay quiet, give when you should pause. That's why silence becomes a discipline. It's not always easy, and it's not always comfortable, but it is often necessary. It gives you time to process your emotions instead of reacting from them. It allows you to observe patterns instead of getting caught in cycles. And most importantly, it creates space for you to reconnect with your own sense of worth without outside interference. When you are constantly communicating with someone who is inconsistent, your mood, your thoughts, even your confidence can start to depend on their behavior. If they respond, you feel good. If they don't, you feel uncertain. That's not balance, that's dependency. But when you pull back and embrace silence, you break that pattern. You stop allowing their actions to dictate your emotional state. You begin to stabilize yourself from within rather than seeking stability from them. And that's where self-respect begins to strengthen. Because now your sense of value is no longer tied to their attention. It's grounded in your own standards. Silence also teaches you patience with yourself. It forces you to sit with your feelings instead of immediately trying to resolve them through external validation. And in that process, you start to understand your own needs more clearly. You start to recognize what you truly deserve versus what you've been tolerating. And once that clarity sets in, it becomes harder to go back to accepting less. Because you've seen the difference between acting from need and acting from self-respect. And that awareness changes your behavior. You stop chasing conversations that don't lead anywhere. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand. You stop giving your time to situations that drain you more than they fulfill you. Not out of bitterness, but out of growth. Out of a deeper understanding that your peace is not something you should compromise just to keep someone in your life. And when you reach that point, your silence is no longer just a reaction to someone else's behavior. It becomes a reflection of your own standards. It becomes a way of protecting your energy, your time, and your emotional well-being. And that is what true self-respect looks like. Not loud, not forceful, but steady, intentional, and unshakable. Some men won't come back in that. Your answer now, let's talk about the part nobody likes to hear, but everybody needs to understand. Silence does not guarantee a return. It does not magically make every man realize your worth, and it does not force someone to step up if they never intended to in the first place. Sometimes when you go silent, nothing happens. No message, no call, no effort, no reaction. And that silence on the other side can feel heavy, confusing, even painful, because a part of you expected that your absence would trigger something, that it would make him pause, reflect, and come back with clarity. But when that doesn't happen, you are left with a truth that is hard to accept, but incredibly important to face. Not every connection is meant to continue, and not every person is capable of valuing you the way you deserve. When a man does not respond to your absence, it is not always because he is confused or taking his time to figure things out. Sometimes it is because he has already decided, consciously or unconsciously, that your presence is not something he feels compelled to fight for. And that realization can sting because it challenges the effort you invested, the patience you showed, and the hope you carried. But here's where perspective matters. His lack of response is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of his priorities, his emotional capacity, and his level of investment. People act according to what matters to them. If something truly holds value in their life, they make room for it, they protect it, they pursue it. When they don't, their inaction speaks louder than any excuse they could offer. Silence becomes a mirror, not just for him, but for you. It shows you what is real without the distraction of words or promises. Because words can be comforting. They can create the illusion of effort. They can keep you holding on to potential instead of reality. But consistent action, or the lack of it, removes that illusion. When you step back and nothing follows, you are no longer guessing. You are no longer analyzing mixed signals or trying to interpret inconsistent behavior. You are seeing the truth in its simplest form. And while that truth may not be what you hoped for, it is still valuable because it frees you from uncertainty. It allows you to stop investing energy into a situation that is not growing, not evolving, not meeting you where you are. Too often, people stay attached to the idea of what something could become instead of accepting what it currently is. They wait for change that never comes. They hold on to potential that never materializes. And in doing so, they delay their own growth. But when you accept that some men won't come back, you release yourself from that cycle. You stop waiting. You stop hoping for a different outcome. And you start redirecting your focus toward yourself and toward opportunities that align with your standards. And that shift is powerful because it transforms what feels like rejection into clarity. It shows you that your silence did not cause a loss. It revealed one that already existed. It showed you that the connection was not as strong or as mutual as it needed to be. And once you see that clearly, you gain the ability to make better decisions moving forward. You become more intentional with your energy, more selective with your time, and more aligned with your own value. Because understanding that someone can walk away or remain distant without hesitation teaches you an important lesson. Not everyone deserves access to you, and not every connection deserves your effort. And when you fully accept that, you stop chasing closure from people who have already given you an answer through their silence, and you start creating your own closure by choosing to move forward with clarity and self-respect. Final truth. Silence always reveals everything at the end of the day. Silence isn't about making someone chase you. It's about finding yourself again. It's about stepping back and letting truth reveal itself without force, without pressure, without confusion. When you go quiet, you stop begging for clarity and start receiving it naturally. And that clarity will either bring someone closer or push them out of your life for good. But understand this, both outcomes serve you because what stays is real and what leaves was never meant to last. So hold your silence with confidence, protect your peace, and remember, you lose nothing that wasn't truly yours.